2026, here we go. Year 3 of our podcast. What's happening, guys?
New year, no new look. We all kind of 1 year older, and I don't know, Jay. It's
Speak
tougher
for
and tougher to
yourself.
find.
Speak for yourself, Craig. I'm feeling 5 years younger coming into this year.
Well, I'll just say we talked about the last podcast. Talk about old age security, Clark. You're 1 year closer to getting your OAS. How's that for a
I'm
win?
going to defer it to age 70, so I'm actually 5 years further than I thought I'd be. So,
Good to see everybody. Welcome to 2026.
yeah, what a crazy world we live in these days, hey? If you look at kind of what's going on in the world these days, Greenland, the big topic of the week. Just interesting world, kind of continuation of a lot of craziness we've seen over the last year or so.
Everywhere you look, there seems to be a resurgence of imperialism and changing borders, and never thought we'd be dealing with this sort of thing, but here we are. So 2026, we've got our prediction podcast. We're going to go through last year's predictions and how we did in making calls for 2025 and roll out some new calls for 2026. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get right into it. I guess anything in your minds that stood out for 2025 from an investing perspective? Obviously, we had a strong year, but what will we remember 2025 for?
We have to look back at kind of how we entered this year, March and April, when you had the Trump tariff tantrum and Liberation Day and whatever else you want to call it. We saw a pretty quick and significant market correction. I think at the time, nobody would have anticipated that we would have seen a swift recovery in the results that we saw last year.
Yeah, politics, geopolitics, inflationary pressures, interest rates, that kind of was the rhetoric of the year. And I don't know, I think most people looking back would probably not expected the returns I think that markets and general portfolios generated in 2025. But I think all things considered, it was a pretty successful year for clients. So
similar to what you said there, Clark, I think it's easy to forget how negative market enthusiasm or sentiment was back in April, and how certain so many investors and professionals were that tariffs were going to cause a recession and markets were going to follow suit. And it just goes to show you again how unpredictable markets are in the short term, and how important it is, as we say time and time again, to kind of stay invested and believe in the companies that we own. So just another reminder of that sage advice.
I think another theme that I think we talked about it and really showed up in the fourth quarter of last year was the broadening out of equity markets. 2023 and 2024 were predominantly dominated by the mega cap 7, the big tech names that we often reference. The other 493 names in the S&P 500, they started to generate returns as well. And in fact, I think 2025, those 493 names outperformed not outperformed, they provided more total return to the S&P 500 than the 2 years previous. So that's a positive sign that you're starting to see, again, some broadening out of market breadth and participation. That's what you want to see as an investor.
It's a sign of a healthier market, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just skewed to, 7 or 8 or 9 names that generate 50% plus of returns. And that's actually, as we now into 2026, that's a theme that continues to roll out. So for us and for our clients, that's a positive change.
So a quick recap of some of the calls we made last year. We'll hold ourselves accountable. We asked ourselves what market would do better, the Canadian market or the US market. And Craig and Clark were both on the side of the US market to see a continuation of a kind of 15-year trend. Myself, I took the Canadian market, and we'll notch one for my prediction there, as the Canadian market slightly edged the US market last year. Interest rates, predicting whether we'd be lower or higher. Craig and Clark both expected interest rates to go lower. I kind of took the other side of that and suggested we might see a resurgence of inflation. We did see interest rates go lower, certainly on the short end in Canada, as the central banks continue to try to push rates lower to encourage more economic growth. calls on the Canadian dollar, we asked ourselves if it would be closer to 75 or 65 cents at the end of the year. And we did see a little bit of a dip kind of early in the year, but it did end up closer to 75 cents, closing the year around 73. So that was nice to see a little bit of strengthening in our dollar. We all had picked that as the result for the year. So kudos to all of us there. We tried to pick a sector, best sector of the year, of the kind of 15 generally recognized sectors in the US. The big idea here was to question whether technology would continue to lead the way. For a long time throughout the year, it looked like they weren't going to be the leading sector, but some strength in the fourth quarter actually turned out technology was once again the best performing sector. Craig picked energy. I picked industrials, and industrials came a close third place. So we saw some strength with kind of the whole idea of a reinvestment in the US theme, which is something I think we'll continue to see this year. Some of the kind of more unusual predictions that we tried to ask ourselves. Craig called for an end from the kind of work from home theme that we saw kind of coming out of COVID, and that definitely was something we saw continue to come to an end as more and more companies called for their employees back into the office. And I think we'll again continue to see more of that as we look for increasing productivity. Clark suggested that the excitement about Trump and his relationships with the tech sector would wane, and we'd see a little bit of a decline in his popularity. And I think that one definitely played out as suggested. And I said that 2025 would be the year we confirmed alien life, and where it was not proven right on that front. So.
Hey,
What were you thinking? I'm curious,
you
and
must have just
I'm
finished
actually
watching
more
the.
curious what what your crazy prediction is for this year. If we jump
Just
ahead a
finished
little bit.
episode 4 of Stranger Things or something like that.
I'll be right about that at one point. I'm sure of that. So
AJ, why
Yeah,
don't we kind
the
of
clock
circle
is right twice a day, right? You might be right, but I don't know. Crazy.
net? I think we all had some decent calls, and as they say, forecasting is a bit of a fool's game. But why don't we circle back? One thing I think that's important we talk about is what happens to the Canadian dollar. A lot of our portfolios have U.S. dollar currency exposure, as do a lot of our clients. So why don't we talk a little bit about kind of where we see the Canadian dollar for the next 6, 12 months as well. Any thoughts on that, Jay Clark?
I'll give kind of a timeline prediction. I hedge my bets a little bit again, Jay, as you'd say, but I think that we've seen some strength in the last year in the Canadian dollar, versus the US dollar. I think that may wane a little bit in the coming months with some resurgence in US dollar strength. But I think a broader prediction of mine this year will be twofold, really. One is the US debt problem becoming more front and center than it has been historically. And I also think that the US economy that has just shown extreme resiliency, over the last number of years, I think may come under pressure. And I think both those things, may, cause a continued deterioration in the US dollar. So that, and then couple it with, I think we are doing some things right here in Canada. I know Jay's been thinking that would occur for the last 5 years or so, and got the prediction about the Canadian market doing well last year correct. And I think that trend may continue where, we see some positive things happen here in Canada. So kind of on a relative basis, the US may be seeing some relative weakness where Canada continues, slowly improving from where we've been at. And I think that'll be, later in the year positive for the Canadian dollar relative to the US dollar.
Yeah, I'll pick up on your point. I completely agree. I think you're starting to potentially see, and go back to the Ray Dalio books of the world, that you're starting to see this potential cracks in the trust for U.S. dollar denominated assets, and I think that was a large contributing factor of why gold and precious metals outperformed in 2025 and continue to outperform this year so far. Is we talk about global central banks, and I think just investors globally are looking for other hard assets or non-US dollar assets, as I said. My point to the Canadian dollar, I think it's going to be a tale of two periods now leading up to July 1st. That's when I believe CUSMA I think that the official agreement expires by then. And I think there's three outcomes that can potentially happen with that. Either they ink a new deal, um, they cancel the deal, which is probably the worst outcome, or they look at doing something, I think it's what's called a sunset clause, where they look at annually renewing that contract, which I think creates a lot of currency volatility. My point being is, I think if we don't ink a deal, or if it's the latter, I think that puts tremendous pressure on the Canadian dollar, because I think that will put a lot of distrust in foreign investment into Canada. Because if you don't have a stable currency, and if there's no agreement with its largest trading partner, I just think that puts a lot of pressure on the Canadian economy, domestically and foreign.
I'm curious, is this is the prediction show that's a bit of a hedge there? Like if this occurs, then the Canadian dollar will be weak. So is that kind of a call that you think that there will be difficulties and this deal will fall apart, the trade deal with Canada will fall apart and Canadian dollar weaken?
Yeah, I think I don't think it's going to be based off of Canadian economic numbers. I just think we're still in this kind of muted environment, where I just don't see any positives coming out of the Canadian economy. I think it's going to be based off of what happens with the free trade agreement. That's going to be the
Interesting.
determining
Okay.
factor.
I'm just going to, as an aside, you mentioned Ray Dalio a minute or two ago, and in the context of kind of what's going on in the States, if anybody wants a good read, and I think Craig, you've read this book, Ray
Yeah.
Dalio's Principles of Dealing with the Changing World Order. It's a long book, it's a good book. Parts of it, could be a cure for insomnia. There's a lot of data in there, but it's a really good look back at countries that have been superpowers that have faltered over time. And he makes the case that that's kind of the position that the U.S. is in now. And I think it's a timely read, for anybody that's interested in that topic.
Yeah. The demise of fiat currencies. In other words, paper currencies eventually go to zero.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with that, but there's some talk in there of that as well. But yeah, I think in general a good read for anybody that's interested in some of the things that we're seeing going on in the world today.
Jay, Canadian dollar, where you at?
I'm going to put my vote again with the Canadian dollar outperforming or strengthening against the US dollar. And I think I remain optimistic about our economy and the potential that we have. And I think some of the things that have been happening over the last year demonstrated some change in policy. And I think, the trade agreements are going to continue to be a big story. But of course, the oil market is going to have a big impact on the Canadian dollar, as we do remain a petrocurrency. I think a lot of the resources that we have and continue to develop will continue to attract or will regain the attention of foreign investors as we continue to kind of open ourselves up again after 10 years of kind of shutting that industry down. And so I think yeah, Canadian versus US dollar, I will expect to see a stronger Canadian dollar come the end of the year. So
Yeah, I was just
sorry, go
going to
ahead.
say, I agree with you. And that's kind of the point I was making, Jay. I don't know if I made my prediction clear. I think we see some weakness with the Canadian dollar in the near term, but kind of as we get into the second half of the year, a pickup for the exact same reasons. I think, so I disagree with Craig, thinking that the trade agreement itself is going to be kind of the driver of the currency. I think that there has been a change in sentiment towards Canada, and I think part of that comes from a change, like a negative sentiment towards the United States by a lot of our larger trading partners. And if you see what Carney's out there doing, renegotiating trade deals, he just did that with China. He's been over in the Middle East. And I think, from an outsider looking into Canada, the environment politically seems a lot more favorable than it did over the last decade. And I think that has a considerable effect on, foreign investment in Canada. And I think that is over time the largest driver of the currency move.
Next up, Canadian market versus the US market versus, let's call it, the rest of the world. So last year, international markets, if we can use kind of international developed markets or IFA indexes, were actually the top performer relative to, so it was kind of IFA, Canadian, US markets was the order of performance. All three performed very strongly. If we're looking ahead for 2026, where are we gonna pick the best performing market.
I kind of myself personally get tired of kind of picking, geographic markets, what's going to outperform, what's not. Part of the reason that I think, as you said, I got it wrong last year. But, one of the things we try to drive home is that markets are just markets. They're a basket of sectors and they're a basket of stocks. And, bottom line is the reason for the outperformance, the primary, if not sole reason for the outperformance of Canadian markets versus US markets last year was the significant strength in the precious metal sector, so gold. So making a call on the Canadian market is simply saying, what do we think gold's going to do or not? And if we do it relative to the US market, what's, the 40% of the S&P 500 that's one sector, technology, what do tech stocks do? And it's just, so I'm not, yeah, I just think it's a tough call to make. And I think, again, you're making calls on a concentrated market in one sector in a sense. So I'm not going to make a call this year. What I'm going to say is I think it's going to,
Ooh.
no, you just got to hear me out here. I think I'm going to go kind of along the lines of what Craig mentioned 10 minutes ago or so, which is a continuing broadening out of markets generally, where you see this kind of bifurcated market that we saw in the States, which was all technology doing well and nothing else doing well. In Canada, significant strength in precious metals. I just think you get broader participation in the market where you get other sectors other than those concentrated sectors showing some strength. And what that, how that translates into whether, the S&P 500 outperforms the TSX 60, I don't really care, to be honest. What is more important to me is, do we get broader diversification or participation in the market, which at the end of the day is beneficial to a well-diversified portfolio.
Greg, what's your
Uh,
call for the year ahead? Come on, give the fans what they want.
well, you guys, I'm going to say of the three of us, I've been far more bullish on technology over the last number of years. I'm going to say 2026, you're finally going to start to see some major divergences in earnings. And I think you're going to see that. And I think you've already seen the early signs of that, of the technology names. The CapEx announcement and build out plans that they have, I think you're going to start to see cracks in that. And investors are going to start to question the return on investment of those CapEx plans. And I think that's what's going to impact parts of the technology sector. So I'm kind of on Clark's side here that I think you're going to see broader sector diversification and earnings from the likes of industrials, healthcare, and I'm going to even throw financials outperform on a relative basis the earnings growth of technology. That will be my call.
Here, Craig. I like you're being on my side of the fence. So Jay, if you
Well,
really
it's
do want to,
but here's the thing. But I'm also going to say this for technology. If you actually look at where the big arguments, the valuation of the mega cap seven. If you look at those seven names, five of them coming into 2026 are cheaper than where they were coming into 2025. So I don't think you can count those names out. Um, but I think a lot of good news and a lot of that earnings growth potential and realize what we saw in 2025 has been priced into the likes of Alphabet. I'd say Nvidia as part of that as well. Not saying that you still don't want to own those names, but I just don't see them gapping higher like they did in 2025.
so I see Jay sitting here with a grin on his face because he's got a true prediction that he wants to share, I think.
Yeah,
And
we're trying to stick our neck out here, guys. Come
well,
on.
then stick
Yeah.
your neck out here. I can
I'm gonna
see you're
say
prepared to do it.
I'm gonna say Canada outperforms again, and I'm gonna say it's not going to be because of precious metals. It's going to be because of the oil market. I just think geopolitics is going to come to a head, and we're going to see disruption in supply, and oil prices are going to rise. And as I said earlier, we've got a petrocurrency, and a large part of our industry is still related to the oil and gas industry, and I think that's going to be the story of 2026. So we'll see. I'm gonna stake my claim.
Well, watch WTI and watch nat gas prices, and yeah, they're tightly correlated to the price of those commodities. So we'll see.
Jay, we are going to talk in a few minutes about sectors as well. Is that right, or do you want to talk about that now? Just saying that because I do
Well,
agree with
if
you.
you want to pick a sector instead of a country, then by all means go ahead.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to my point where we see broader diversification of the market. I agree 110% that that would have been my sector call for this year, would be energy. I was actually going to say natural gas, but it's up 15% this morning. I'm not sure if you see the commodity, just kind of on a cold weather forecast. But I agree completely. I think we see two things. We see agree with geopolitical risk of some sort that causes a jump in energy prices or oil prices in general. I think we're around $60 right now. I wouldn't be surprised to see WTI get up to 80 to 90 at some point during the year because of something geopolitical that occurs. On the natural gas side, not necessarily dictated by geopolitics. Generally, it's more of a local market, but I think we see a significant run up in natural gas prices. I think this morning we're at what, $3. I could see us getting up to 4 to 5. A lot of these natural gas companies have huge leverage on their earnings at those prices. And that could be driven by weather, as we're seeing today with natural gas up 15% this morning. Could be driven by continued focus on liquefying that natural gas and exporting to Asia, exporting to Europe. And third, I think something that goes missing. I think we've talked about in other podcasts that we've done. This whole demand for energy that comes out of AI. A lot of it's been focused on nuclear. There's only so much nuclear out there or uranium out there. And I think the demand for natural gas from that area is going to really start to pique interest. And I think all those things collectively mean the energy sector, I would say, would do well this year.
So I was 1 year early based off my 2025 call. Although actually energy didn't too bad if you kind of break it out what parts of energy performed well. Some of the refiners did extremely well. If you kind of look at some of those names that fall into energy, such as utilities, they had a really strong year as well. So I'd say that theme continues. I would agree with that.
1 year early means you were wrong last year, but that's just just for interesting.
I try to recognize trends before the general public does.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Next topic, Canadian housing market's been struggling for some time now. We've seen prices come down. We've seen rents continue to fall here in Vancouver. We've seen developers going bankrupt, a lot of stress on the system. Is this the year that we see the Canadian housing market bottom? Can we expect to see higher prices? What are your thoughts?
By bottom, are you saying nationally or again, it's based it on provinces? I think you're going to continue to see real estate outperform in provinces like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, which still on a relative basis, I think is more affordable. And I think that's going to be the one of the key themes is affordability here in Canada. So I think you're still going to see stress in markets such as Vancouver, potentially here in the Okanagan, areas like Toronto. And I would say that, yeah, you're going to probably see continued relative outperformance in those provinces I mentioned. But I just don't think it's going to be a runaway year for real estate. Central banks can try to engineer bond yields by pushing interest rates lower, but bond markets are singing a different tune. They've essentially been benign for 2025. So, yeah, mortgage rates, I don't think you're going to see them drop much lower, which is going to be the big catalyst for a resurgence in real estate.
Craig saying lower. Clark, what do you got?
I would agree. I think we see lower real estate prices. We definitely don't see a resurgence this year. I think people tend to forget that declines in real estate, other than a shock event like, the financial crisis or COVID, where you see prices fall and immediately fall back up. But you kind of see a structural bear market in real estate like we saw in the 90s where things decline consistently for a few years and stay sideways for another 5 or so. I think that's the kind of environment we're in. And so agree with Craig is that I don't think we see stimulus with prices with lower mortgage rates. I think we're already there. And then the other side of the equation for Canadian real estate is what happens with immigration. I don't see a lifting of the moratorium on foreign buyers, this year or anytime soon. And I think without that influx of foreign money buying our real estate, and there's huge supply out there in the condo market. I just think that there's continued pressures this year for all those reasons.
And one thing I was going to mention here that we've all studied it, we've all read about it, is the a large percentage of mortgages here in Canada are set to renew 25, 26, and 27. And that's off of generational low mortgage rates coming out of COVID. That I think the pressure of coming out of a 2.5, likely rolling into somewhere in a 3 to 4% 5 year term is going to be probably a bit of a realization for those who have to renew and roll those mortgages over. So
Definitely a big factor.
yeah, because I think there was expectation that you could roll rates over at where you were 5 years ago, and that the reality is you're anywhere from 30 to 60% higher.
I think the big story with the housing market is going to continue to be immigration. I mean, the Canada had its first ever record of negative immigration last year, and it's going to be interesting because I think it's the feds are either going to change course and try to help save the housing market or continue on the path of this change of course in immigration policy. And I'm hopeful that we stay the course and continue to see prices drift lower and try to get to some just a little bit closer to some level of affordability in kind of the main cities that we all live in. And I think that is just such a key ingredient in terms of attracting investment, attracting the professionals that we want to have immigrate to Canada, that we need in terms of the doctors and those types of professions that we are so desperately in need of. So if we can see more affordability and at the expense of lower prices in the housing market, I think that's a net benefit for everyone.
All three
Okay.
of us are saying lower prices, flat to lower is
Yeah.
what was that?
Yeah.
Okay, fair.
Okay, some little less market related calls here, but will the US own Greenland at the end of this year?
Wow. No, I don't think they will. If they do, I think we have bigger problems to deal with than whether the U.S. owns Greenland or not. Um, if I was to predict how that might play out, I think that there's a couple things going on there. I think one is a drive by Trump to secure natural resources, particularly rare earth minerals, of which there's a ton in the Arctic. I think there's other ways to go about doing that rather than, acquiring a country or taking over a country. But also from a Arctic security, and the two of those things are tied in. I think probably what we end up seeing is some sort of an agreement where, the U.S. can build as many bases in Greenland as it wants based on historical agreements. I think maybe we see acceptance of more U.S. military in Greenland, but in addition to that, more European military would be my thought. But Greenland continuing to remain sovereign on itself as a protectorate or whatever it might be of Denmark. That would be my call. I hope that I'm right because I would hate to see what happens if I'm wrong on that one.
Yeah, I'm simply no. I think it's just part of Trump's playbook that we seem to be getting a little bit more used to, which is I think they call it the taco trade. Trump always chickens out. I think this is par for the course. What he does, he takes an extremely aggressive approach and dials it back, and I think it's going to be no different this time. So I'm going to be short but sweet. No.
Yeah, and that's my point, Craig, is I think that,
Yeah.
part of this, I mean, I don't know how serious he is, but I think part of this is that kind of bullying and to get really what he wants, which is access to rare earth minerals, in this case, more commodities, but potentially better security in the Arctic. And again, I think there's other ways to do it, but his way of doing most of these things is a really, really hard stance, which scares everybody in this case.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it kind of tempers down, and there'll be some solution that he gets part of what he wants.
I think it's the same story with Venezuela, right? It's he'll tell you one thing, but he's really after the access to rare earths, and he'll come out strong and be a bully and back off when he gets, a little bit of a win that he can brag about to his base and hopefully agree that we don't see any sort of military conflict or the kind of alliances that the US and we have with the rest of Europe kind of fall apart because of something so stupid. So
Just one comment I'd make, and be careful that don't go too much on a limb here, but one of the things I've mentioned on previous podcasts here is that one of the, this isn't a prediction, but kind of a comment I'd make is that, I think that the US with a lot of the recent policies increasingly finds itself more isolated. And I think that's, from that side of the border, there's a lot of people that can see that as a win, focus more internally. But I think from a lot of people looking from the outside in, and you think about how Europe's feeling right now, is that, I mean, how do you recover from this sort of, you know, negotiation and geopolitics in a sense? Like, how does the US, a year from now or even 5 years from now, look to kind of reacquaint itself with what has historically been its allies? And
Yeah.
this is going to be really hard to come back from, right? And I think about Europe in particular, but even Canada. And I think is a bigger risk out there is you have a country like the United States increasingly finding itself more isolated from the rest of the world. I don't know exactly what that means, but I think that's what comes as a result of a lot of this.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. Goes back to my comments on the Kuzma deal between now and July 1st. It's I think that's a big talking point for us here in Canada.
Next fun one. Alberta looks like they're going to have a secession vote come October if they can get enough signatures on a ballot initiative right now. If it does go to a vote, what are your thoughts? And just to so everyone's aware, the current polling is pretty low. I think the last poll I saw was about 35% in favor of seceding from Canada. But what do we think? Do you think this has any chance of happening, or is this something we should be worried about as the kind of industrial engine of the country potentially leaves us, or what are our thoughts?
I'd say no.
No.
I wouldn't be surprised if I mean, you can get enough signatures if you knock on enough doors to get the ability to go to a referendum. Think about what's going on in California with some of the referendums there. They make absolutely no sense. They probably won't go through, but you can get enough signatures to get the referendum going forward. I think I might be a little bit in left field with these numbers, but something in the top of my mind says that like 89% of Albertans do not want to separate from Canada, 11 do. Does that sound right? And if that's the case, if a referendum goes forward, I just don't think it has a chance of success.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic you're going to continue to see better provincial trade agreements over the next number of years. And I think that can hopefully smooth out some of those edges of, the potential separatist movement. You kind of even seen some tidbits of that on energy that you mentioned there, Jay, and, kind of expanding our pipeline and capacity here in Canada. So that's where I'd say, in fact, I think you get better provincial agreements and alliances going forward. That would be my call.
Yeah.
I think you saw the MOU deal with Alberta and the feds and Carney and I think that's maybe just a little bit of a non-issue for at least the next couple of years, but at least they're showing some intent, and whether or not they can make that happen and see it come to fruition, time will tell. But at least they're not at a federal level saying absolutely no, and hopefully that appeases the Alberta energy sector for some time until we can get some better agreements done. I mean, I think the one risk there is, like you said, Craig, if the North American agreement ends up hurting Canada in a big way, and all of a sudden our energy sector is subject to tariffs, and we don't have offtake agreements, or we can't get our energy to international markets. That's obviously a big risk, and if BC continues to block further development of pipelines, that could be a increasing issue as the year goes on. So
Just think about what that would look like for Alberta, right? Is that, if they were to succeed with a separation vote, and I don't think they would, but how many years would it take them just to deal with separating from Canada, which takes their focus
and cost
completely
as
away,
well.
well, the
And
cost and completely away from really what they want to achieve. And the second point would be, they think it's difficult dealing or negotiating federally with their own country and, negotiating with provinces like BC. All of a sudden they find themselves, negotiating with a completely different country. I think it's careful what you wish for, right? I mean, there's no perfect world or no perfect province out there. but I think it's, I think a lot of people that may, wish for separation haven't really considered what the negatives may be as well.
All right, let's end with a fun one. I'm going to throw two sports related questions out here. So, World Cup's coming to town
Yeah.
next year. How far will Canada make it in the World Cup?
I'm going to say it's funny you say. I was thinking about that. I hate to say this. I think the World Cup is potentially going to be a flop here in North America. I think the price of tickets is far too high.
It's
I
so
think
crazy.
I think the viewership relative to what you see in Europe and Latin America and Asia, I just don't think it's there. And I think security, you might see some flare-ups on that as well. So I'm hopeful. I'd like to attend pending prices, but I think this has kind of been throwing it against the wall and see if it sticks type approach. And I just don't think we have the experience here in North America. So I'm going to
Okay,
make a
well,
call on that. I think it's going to be somewhat of a flop.
no, we're not. We're asking how far is Canada going to make it? The
Oh,
team. We're not talking about the
no.
success of
That's
the
my general call. I don't think Canada's going to make it very far.
not out of the
Well,
round of not out of their
I'm gonna
group.
say I'm gonna say because the guys actually have a pretty good team. They got a great coach. That I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they're actually gonna make it to the what do they call it, a group of 32.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a stretch, if you look back historically what Canada's done. But I mean, we've got, as I said, a strong team. Craig, just to your point with respect to whether it's a flop or not, I don't know. I think it's going to be like a lot of things like the Olympics, where it creates a lot of excitement in the city, good economic activity. The price of tickets, though,
But yeah, what are
I,
they?
I mean, I'll give you an idea, and I hate to kind of share this on the call, but the only way you could really get tickets is you go in this lottery, right? Unless you're prepared to buy them off StubHub down the road, right? So I went in this lottery, and the way it works is you choose, the games that are going to be here in Vancouver. You choose the games that you want to be in the lottery for, and then you choose the level of the tickets that you want. And if you choose the highest level, you can say, yeah, you'll take lower tickets if they're available. And so I kind of thought, well, the way you're going to get tickets is, well, go in as much as you can, right? The highest price tickets, and make the election or the lottery for every game. So I did. And then I get this email back from FIFA that basically says, I did put my credit card number in, by the way, that the cost of your tickets will be $23,200, right?
Oh,
So,
for the entire tournament or for one game?
oh no, no, this is for the lottery that I put in for every game in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And I think I had 6 weeks to kind of change that before they kind of closed it off. And I was kind of humming and hawing because I looked at that and I was like, geez, if I get tickets for every game, if I win each of these lotteries and get tickets, I got to charge
Yeah.
my credit card for 23 grand to go to, I don't know, like 8 games or something. And to be honest, the games in Vancouver are not that, they're not that appealing. It's not like you've got Argentina playing the UK and Vancouver.
Yeah.
Well,
So
pick them up.
it's crazy expensive. And again, I hope I can go and get tickets. I hope that I don't get all the tickets that I submitted my lottery
Well,
application
buy
for.
them all and I'll look for you scalping them outside of BC Place here at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, me as a scalper. Let's see if that works.
Yeah.
But anyhow,
Good luck making money on that scalp.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm going to call the Canadian men's team going to make it to the round of 16. Hopefully
Yeah.
that turns out to be true. All right, last but
I,
not
I,
least, will a Canadian team win the Stanley Cup this year? We've got a couple decent teams. Obviously, the Canucks aren't going anywhere this year, but hopefully continuing to lose games and get a good draft pick. But I don't know, can Edmonton finally get their hands on the trophy, or Toronto maybe?
if anybody's out in Toronto and for all our colleagues, they think the Leafs are going to win every year. So I don't know. It's tough. I would rather, I'm not trying to pivot here, Jay, but I think what's going to gather all the hockey attention is what's going to happen with the Olympics. I'd love to see another U.S. Canada showdown like we saw with the Four Nations Cup. I think that's late February here, so within probably next time we're doing this podcast, we'll have a pretty good idea what that looks. And I think that's going to grip the entire nation again. What happens with the men's Canadian hockey team, because it's the first time in what 3, 4 Olympics that we have the best of the best playing each other.
You sound like a politician. I mean, you just can't answer the questions today. The question was,
No,
do you think a
I
Canadian
said
team will win
Canadians
the
men's
Stanley
soccer
Cup? And you're
team
all of a
is not
sudden
going to
off on
make it out
Team
of the
Canada.
groups. What's that?
Yeah. I can't believe
No, a
that.
Canadian team's not going to win the Stanley Cup. Let's just
So I would agree with Craig on the point that he finally made, which is the Canadian team will not. I think Edmonton. I think Jay, as you say, has a chance. I was in Edmonton. I don't know, it was back a couple months ago, and went to a Oilers game, and it was disastrous. It was against the Avalanche, and they lost 9-1. I mean, it was the worst game I had seen or sat through in a long time. And I think it's just a reminder that, I mean, if they can lose like that and fall apart like that, I just don't know if they've got what it takes this year to win the Stanley Cup.
All right, I'll take the other side and remain optimistic about all things Canada, and I'm going to
Such
say
a homer.
that
You're such a homer.
Edmonton finally gets what McDavid deserves. So, all right,
Jay
well,
has got
that's
some home country bias. I mean,
Oh.
he does. I mean, on this call for sure, he's got some home country bias.
Every conversation.
remaining optimistic. So much potential, as I've said for many years. So, all right, I think that's a good place to close it out. First edition of the podcast for the year. Next edition, Clark and I will be coming to you from a new or different office, anyways, and so a new background for us. But as always, we appreciate any feedback and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.